Morning everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to look at the Victorian SACS Education and Information Workshop. It's a program funded by the Australian Government and brought to you today by NDS, ACOSS and Jobs Australia. In terms of today's webinar, we're going to have a look at transitioning to the modern award, specifically what is the transition timetable and how we move from our old penalties and loadings across to the modern award provisions. We're also going to have a look at other conditions of the Modern Award and the Modern Award review that happened in November last year, as well as some other issues that are currently under review as of April this year. We're also going to have a look at some implementation issues for each organisation and in terms of the Equal Remuneration Order and implementation here in Victoria. We're going to look at pay rates, and then lastly we'll look at industrial obligations and funding. In terms of your previous Victorian awards, there are 4 awards that translate to the Modern Award, and we've laid out for you here. SACS VIC translates usually into the SACS or Crisis Accommodation classification streams within the Modern Award. The Residential Support Award, most employers will translate into the SACS, part of the SCHADS award. In terms of attendant care, your most likely translation is into home care, but those employees may translate into the SACS part of the SCHADS or Schedule B, depending on what their position descriptions outline. Disability services in Victoria are more likely to translate to the SACS part of the SCHADS. There may be exceptions, as you can see, and that will depend on the precise duties, and it's really about you having a look at the position description and rating that against the Modern Award classification schedules. In terms of the transition timetable, moving from our old SACS awards, or the old Victorian awards across to the SCHADS award, from the 1st of July last year we had to have done the classification translations over to the Modern Award classifications. In terms of pay rates, including the Equal Remuneration Order, they started phasing from July last year, but the first implementation of the Equal Remuneration Order was payable from December last year. Penalty rates and loadings commenced phasing from July 2012, and that transition will go right through until July 2014. Allowances became payable under the Modern Award from January 2010, and all other conditions of the Modern Award have applied from January 2010 also. In terms of shift penalties, what we're looking at is transitioning from the old SACS award. The afternoon shift was always 12.5%, and that maintains, as per the Modern Award, to the 12.5%. The only slight variation from the old SACS to the Modern Award is the Modern Award is an afternoon shift, is a shift that finishes after 8 p.m. and before midnight. The previous SACS award was a shift that ended between 7 and 8 p.m. So what we in fact need to do is phase out that particular hour of loading. And the way we do that, it was a 12.5% that applied. However, we moved down and phased them out. So from July last year, you would only apply a 5% loading to that particular hour, but you would continue to pay the shift loading for any time between 8 p.m. and midnight. From July this year, that 5% will phase down to 2.5%. And then you can see from July 2014, it'll be only the Modern Award provisions that apply, which is the 12.5%, and that hour of loading will no longer apply. In terms of the night shift was always 15% in the SACS VIC. Public holidays was always 50% as it is in the Modern Award. Saturday is 50% and Sunday is 100%, so these will continue to apply as per the Modern Award. In terms of transitioning from the residential award, and we use this as an example, the SCHADS provisions of 12.5% never applied under the Resi, however they will now start to phase in. So we go from a 0% originally up to a 7.5% for a shift that finishes between 8 p.m. and midnight. But it is possible at the same time as we're doing that, applying a 7.5% in, where also at the same time the Resi used to have a 10% loading for a shift finishing after 6 p.m. before 8 a.m. or 8 a.m. or start between 6 p.m. and finishes at 6:30 a.m. and that was a 10% loading. That loading actually needs to phase out because that no longer applies in the modern award. So what we'll be doing at the same time as we're phasing in this 7.5%, we're actually reducing the 10% to a 4% loading. That was from July last year. From July this year, we'll phase the 7.5% heading towards the 12.5%, and we'll go to 10% from July this year. At the same time, that 4% phases down to 2%. So you will in fact be paying someone 12%. From July next year, you'll just be applying the 12.5%, which is the modern award provision. In terms of the night shift, again, night shift didn't exist in the old award, so we need to phase that in. We're currently applying a 9% phased amount. From July this year, it will go to 12%, and then from July next year, we'll be sitting on the modern award provision of 15%. Again, your public holiday Saturdays and Sundays remain the same as per the modern award. In terms of casual loading, and when we talk about casuals, we're talking about true casuals, so those people that you ring in on an irregular basis. Casual loading was always 25% here in Victoria and is still 25% in the modern award, so we'll continue to apply that 25%. Currently under review is weekend loadings for casual. The modern award, as it stands today, doesn't provide for a weekend loading for casuals. So if you have casuals that are true casuals, irregular, not regular work, then you would phase down the Saturday loading from 50% to 20% as of July last year. This year will go to 10%, and then next year will be a 0%. Sunday is 75%. Goes down to 30% as of July last year. From July this year, it'll go to 15%. And then, as you can see here, as per the modern award, there's no loading applicable to a true casual. If you have got casuals that you regularly roster, we say you should get advice from your employer association because it's more likely that you'll need to maintain these loadings. In terms of the modern award review of November 2012, in relation to sleepovers, it clarified that a 4-hour minimum engagement must be included either before or after a sleepover, but it didn't preclude you from working both sides of a sleepover. So the practical application of that is I can ask someone to do a 4-hour shift, an 8-hour sleepover, and they're potentially up to a 6-hour shift either side, on the other side. It's a 10-hour is the maximum you can ask someone to do in a day, so you could do any variation between the sleepover, but the sleepover must be of an 8-hour duration. One of those blocks, either before or after, must be a minimum of 4-hour engagement. In terms of the breaks between shifts, it is 10-hour breaks between shifts. However, where it's associated with the sleepover, it's now been clarified that that can be reduced to 8 hours with agreement with the employee. Also, in terms of the modern award, it's now been clearly defined that just because someone goes into someone's home and provides work in their home doesn't merely push someone into the home care classification under Schedule E of the modern award. You really need to get the position description and look at the types of duties that that person is doing to determine whether they would be more suited under the SACS part of the classifications or whether they would in fact go into home care. Other changes out of the review in November, loadings are payable for broken shifts, and that's determined by the end of the shift time. And 24-hour care provisions can only apply to home care workers. Now, the modern award review of 2012, these issues have yet to be determined, but in terms of part-time employees, the ASU's application seeks to put some minimum engagement periods very similar to the casual, so that would be a 3, a 2 or a 1 hour minimum engagement period around part-time employee that currently don't apply but do apply for casuals. The ASU is also seeking to reinsert the small employer redundancy provisions. They seem to be less of an impost on smaller organisations. The entitlements are not as great as the NES. In terms of broken shifts, the ASU are looking to put in either an allowance or some type of penalty rate around those broken shifts. And as I've mentioned already, casual penalty rates on a weekend currently aren't provided for in the modern award. That's why we're currently phasing them down. However, the ASU's application deals with reinserting those provisions back into the award, and if that happens, that'll mean that casuals do in fact get the weekend loadings. Also under review is annual leave and public holidays in terms of shift workers. In terms of implementation issues under the move to the modern award, a lot of organisations have been talking to us about rostering arrangements and whether they still make sense under SCHADS. And what we mean by that is, under the provisions of the modern award, a shift that finishes after 8 p.m, the whole shift now applies an afternoon shift. What you might be wanting to do is have a look at, does that fit within your organisation? Can you continue to sustain it? If you've got a shift finishing at 8:30, it'll mean that the whole shift is paid at a 12.5% loading. However, if that shift finished at 8 instead of 8:30, there'd be no loading that would apply. It's just something for organisations to consider when looking at cost savings. Another thing to consider is looking at the use of long-term casuals and perhaps making better use of part-time employment. The modern award does certainly afford organisations some flexibility around part-time employment. Even if we look at the minimum engagement period, you still have that flexibility of working on part-time up to 38 hours without the need for overtime. Of course, there are some boundaries around that. And looking at whether it may be better for your organisation to drop the casual loading and move employees over to permanent part-time. That'll also afford those employees annual leave and sick leave, but as I say, the saving is the 25% casual loading. The other thing that's really important to consider is job design and classification. And in terms of taking the organisation forward, what is it going to meet the needs of your organisation on an ongoing basis and in the future? In terms of enterprise agreements, agreements currently remain in force after they've expired until they're either replaced or terminated. And they provide no reduction to the NES, and the conditions continue to apply where they're different to the SCHADS. So if you had a collective agreement that has a 10% loading under the old Resi award, that will continue to apply until you go to replace it. And then you'll have to meet the boot test, and of course that will be the 12.5% afternoon shift. And the pay rates must match the modern award plus the equal remuneration order rates, and we'll have a look at that shortly. If the agreement has a different classification structure, you still need to continue with your own classification structure, but you need to notionally translate across to the modern award to make sure that you know where someone would be classified under the modern award, so that you can monitor the rates of pay during the life of the agreement to make sure you're at least paying those award rates of pay. In terms of the equal remuneration order implementation, the modern award rates increase by 23 to 45%, and the full amount becomes payable on December 2020. Now, those instalments are phased in 9 equal instalments, with one instalment being paid each December. And the pay rates are affected by transitional arrangements moving from your old award to the SCHADS award, and we'll look at that more closely. In terms of your old award rates, these rates were maintained as what we call transitional award rates if they were higher than the modern award. However, if they were lower, you had to move to the modern award rates from the 1st of July 2012. The transitional rates do increase, but they increase at a slower rate than the modern award. And as we said, 19 to 23 is what the modern award moves by, but the old Victorian awards are perhaps not quite as much, but we do get to the same point in December 2020. In terms of the equal remuneration order calculation, I'm going to take you through, this is how we do the actual calculation. So A is represented here as what we call the full equal remuneration payment, or if you think of it, where will be come 2020. B is someone's current award rate or EBA rate, and that's where we are now. So it's either going to be a modern award or your preserved transitional award amount. Each December, you need to work out where we'll be come 2020, deduct that from where we are now, and that'll give you a difference. Divide that by the 1/9, and then add that back to where someone currently is. Again, it's the same calculation for December this year. The only difference is once we've worked out what that 1/9 is, we need to multiply it by 2. In year 3, we multiply it by 3, and so on. I think this clearly illustrates for you practical example of what we're talking about. So as we said, A is where we'll be in December 2020. So you can see that's quite a large chunk of pie. B is where we currently are. Now this is the mod reflected here as the modern award rate, and this is your old SACS, VIC or Resi award rates. Now as you can see, we need to get to the same point by December 2020, and the way that we do that is calculate the difference between the two and then divide that up into 9 slices of the pie, and you can see it's quite a sizable chunk the modern award is moving by. But because our old awards start from a higher base, we still need to arrive at the same point by December 2020, and we divide that difference up by 1/9, and that, as you can see here, is reflected, but it's just smaller slices of the pie. In setting it out, what this is showing you is the modern award moves at quite a high rate of pay. Now that award will move twice each year, once in July in line with the national minimum wage increase, and then in December the 1st of December each year, and that's in line with the equal remuneration order. The other thing to be mindful of here is it is also possible for someone to incrementally increase up. We've not reflected that here. This, as you can see, is the old awards, and they start from a marginally higher base, and they continue to move at up to the same rate come December 2020. It's just that they move at a slower proportionate rate to the modern award rates. So, for example, here in Victoria, we talked about the modern award will move at a level 2 by 23%, but a level 8 will move by 45%. And these are the percentages each year for the modern award rates to move, so between 2.6 to 5%. However, looking at this example, if you're a Resi grade 2, 3 or 4 that's translated to a modern award level 2, you can see it's possible for these grades to move anywhere from 2.6% from 2.2% to 2.6%. In looking at a social worker, for example, class 3, who translates to a level 5, you can see the modern award will move by 4.1%, but because the SACS VIC starts higher, it's likely that award, someone classified at that rate, will move between 1.5 and 1.6 each December rather than the 4.1. Right down to someone who's translated to a level 8, modern award will move by 5%, but the transitional rates will move by approximately 2.9%. Of course, that is affected by the national minimum wage increase each July, so we're not able to give you exact figures, it's just a rough outline. In terms of pay rates, Jobs Australia does provide pay tables, and we have given those to NDS, and you can access at the website presented here. We've also presented the most likely translations together with the applicable pay rates for someone who's translating over, and that's whether the modern award rate or the transitional rates are higher. Just giving an example now, this is what our pay table looks like, and what we're showing here is a social worker class 1. It is possible for someone at that previous level to translate over to a SCHADS level 3 or a SCHADS level 4. And what we've laid out for you here is the applicable rates that you would pay someone that would translate over at each of these particular pay points. Of course, if you don't have access to Jobs Australia website, Jobs Australia pay tables, you can get that information off the Fair Work Ombudsman's Equal Remuneration Order calculator, and you can see here you'll just need to nominate which award that you're coming off. It'll then come up and ask you what was someone previously classified as, and then what have you translated that person to. The table then sets out for you what you would apply for the national minimum wage increase on the 1st of July and what would apply in terms of the equal remuneration order from the 1st of December. I'm just going to pause for a second just to let you know, if you're trying to classify a social worker class 2A, for example, up to a level 8, it's a translation that's unlikely. And if you try and put that in here at a level 8, it'll actually tell you here that this does not work. The same as if you're trying to make a class 2A a SCHADS level 1, again it'll come up here that it doesn't work. If you've got a different translation, it is possible, but it's unlikely if you're correctly classified in accordance with the award. So it may mean that you previously under or over classified someone, or that you're actually trying to incorrectly classify under the modern award, you need to go back and reassess that or get some advice from your employer association. If you're convinced that your calculation is correct, then you may need to calculate those pay rates manually, or as we say, get advice from your employer association. In terms of your industrial obligations and funding, the Commonwealth is committed to fully fund its share, including directly funded and jointly funded programs. And that'll be part of an 8-year phase to assist unfunded programs as well as assisting with government budgeting. In terms of the Commonwealth supplementation, we've laid out here the way that it's being calculated. So it's been the equal remuneration order supplementation is being based on a cost for a SACS level 4. And there are 3 components to doing the calculation. The first is working out what your actual increase is. So because it was only for a 7-month period from December to June, the full ERO was 2.61%, or 7 months worth is 1.52%. Then what's apportioned out is the program funding allocated to SACS wages, and then we multiply that by the grant amount. So reflected here, we're looking at the 7-month increase of 1.52% multiplied by the 70%, which is the wages component, and then the $1 million grant. So for that 7-month period, it's likely that an organisation would have got approximately 10,640. For the 12-month period, 2013 to 2014, that organisation will be looking at roughly $28,980. In terms of state supplementation, there are ongoing negotiations between the Commonwealth and the states regarding the mechanism for Commonwealth supplementation and for national partnership funding arrangements. So in terms of MIN scope, funding agencies only provide supplementation to programs that are expected to employ SACS workers, and there's certainly no commitment to supplement where they're not industrially obliged to. So for example, if your employers are under home care and it's likely that they would be under home care, then you won't be getting supplementary funding in that regard. One of the things to check is that you have correctly classified people under the right award. There are other awards that can be used for similar types of work, including the labour market assistants, the aged care, nurses and health professionals. And there's 2 main tests for coverage by industry awards. What we look at is, are we in the social, community, home care and disability services? So is your organisation covered under there? If they are, you need to have a look at the classification definitions within the award, and if you can cover someone under those classification descriptions, for example your clerical, your social workers, youth workers, etc., then that will be the applicable award. However, if we employed a maintenance person, it's likely that we possibly can't get them under the SCHADS, so therefore we would need to go and find the correct applicable award. Obviously, if we had an electrician, we couldn't cover an electrician under our award. We'd need to go and find the correct award. Also, if SCHADS applies, have we correctly classified employees under home care or SACS? That's looking at whether the position description you would classify under home care or SACS. In terms of industrial obligations and funding, if you're receiving sufficient funding, employees still have an industrial entitlement to be paid the correct rates of pay. We don't have the discretion to underpay due to lack of funding. There are many options that you can look at, such as finding other revenue, absorbing or drawing on reserves. And we also talked about looking at moving casuals over from casual to permanent part-time to make some savings around that casual loading. And also looking at the structure of our shifts and can we make savings around those shift loadings. Otherwise, we can look at things like reducing wages through natural attrition or restructure. Now, if you are going to go through a restructure, I suggest you get that advice from the employer association. There are some stringent rules within the Fair Work Act around your consultation provisions, and you need to ensure that you meet those obligations. Employees are also employed by your organisation and not the funding body, so the responsibility lies with each organisation to ensure that you pay people correctly. I'm just going to put up some resources now. Some good information on the NDS website. Obviously you can access the Fair Work Ombudsman's website as well as the Fair Work Commission website, and FACSIA, as you can see here, has some good information around the equal remuneration order. Also some contact numbers if you needed to get in touch with any one of those organisations to get some more information. I'd like to thank you all for listening today and have a great day.